politics at the tail end of Obama and beyond. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with introductions because I think all of you who are here are aware of the background of our panelists. Starting in this direction, we have Paul Street, who's a noted journalist and author. We have Professor Anthony Montero, who is from Temple University, the African American History Department, Studies Department, not History, but Studies Department. Glenn Ford, who is the executive editor of Black Agenda Report. Margaret Kimberly, who is a senior columnist and editor of Black Agenda Report. And Bruce Dixon, who's from Georgia, he's all the way up here, who is the managing editor of Black Agenda Report. I want to start off very briefly in talking about Black politics at the tail end of Obama and beyond, is that all of the folks who are on this panel this morning had an understanding of who Barack Obama was when he first hit the scene. So there was no confusion in terms of Obama being anything other than a representative and a leader of U.S. imperialism. That was very true. Historic moment aside. That is what we're faced with, and the reality of that has been clearly demonstrated in the first term of his office. So yesterday, and I just want to be very brief about this, I attended a panel discussion, I would say, and I'm not trying to be unkind nor provocative, of Obama apologists, because they have a problem. Because history has been recorded in those first 4 years. That's history. And he will be judged, this president will be judged accordingly. Now, one of the panelists said, and this is a noted Black spokesperson and a lead or a prominent Obama supporter, a keeper of the legacy, if you will, who said, well, you know, I'll use my mother as the best example because she got her back against the wall when people started to criticize Obama the man. Now, I don't know, I haven't heard anyone talk about an unflattering suit he had or a haircut or his, I haven't heard anything other than this brilliant orator, this brilliant politician. So where this revisionist history is coming from, one does not know. But we can expect as time progresses and we see clearly his move to the right even more so than now, that these Obama apologists and revisionists are going to come out with stories to cover their tracks, so to speak. So anyway, I just wanted to tell you that so we'll get a clear lay of the political land and landscape here in terms of who will be talking today. No apologists here. Okay, so we'll start with Glenn Ford.
Good morning, power to the people. We, of course, are coming to the tail end of Obama's presidency. I like it better every day as his term gets shorter every day. And in this second term, we see that he is a lame duck, of course, and among masses of black folks, that this Obama will not be with us forever. And so there's sense in a willingness, finally, to evaluate what has actually happened during this age of Obama, because people are anticipating that it will be gone only 3 years from now. And we also see that some segments of what we at Black Agenda Report like to call the Blackness leadership class are revising their own histories during this age of Obama. All of a sudden they are positioning themselves as having been constructively critical of Obama during this period, when in fact none of that happened. And a few of them are even uttering that forbidden word, demands. We demand jobs of this president, or we demand that you listen to us at least. Those are minimum expectations, but some are at least mouthing the words because they understand that they're going to have to answer for, well, what did you do in the war, Daddy, or what did you do during the Obama phenomenon. We usually talk about the destruction that's occurred in Black America under the Obama presidency, the destruction that he's overseen, and it has been horrific. By many indices, Black folks in a very, very, very short space of time have lost as much as 2 generations in terms of progress. Now, on one hand, that shows that we really haven't made that much progress in 2 generations, or else it could not be so quickly lost. But to return to 1960s levels of poverty and to descend below any historical measurement in the 20th century in terms of Black wealth. Those are very, very dramatic, and the deterioration of the Black condition has not just been more of the same, which is more of a worse situation, but it has been at an accelerated rate compared to other folks, because our position was always so precarious anyway. We could spend a whole presentation just listing the various ways in which the actual objective Black condition in the United States has declined. And we could attach Obama's name to that phenomenon, and it's convenient to do that. But actually, of course, that was capitalism, and Obama was just the guy in charge doing the capitalists' bidding at the time. And if it had been Hillary Clinton, the policies would not have been any different. The Black reaction to those policies would, I am sure, have been quite different. And so as this Obama tenure peters out, we'll see some of his defenders, and this is in an ironic way, maybe a good thing, but some of his defenders will increasingly take the position in hopes of putting a good light on his legacy, which they identify as being somehow a Black legacy, take the position that it was not Obama's fault, that these undeniable by the numbers, this catastrophe was not his fault, it was the fault of capitalism. And I guess that's a good place to have a conversation if that's where, the best place we can go. If they're going to blame the 1% for putting Obama in such an embarrassing position and embarrassing the race thereby, I suppose that's something we can work with. And it would be maybe an improvement in the conversation. But we can't escape the fact that it is the absolute passivity of the Black polity in the face of this destruction, and that has been so alarming. And we can't paper over that. Wall Street didn't make Black people delirious with Obamaism. Wall Street couldn't do that. They created the conditions that led to the destruction, but they could not make Black people feel good about going to hell. That's not in their capacity. Wall Street didn't blind Black people to the fact that Obama was already demonstrably the most right-wing of the 3 Democratic candidates left standing in the primaries. that in some cases, in the case of housing, he was to the right of Hillary Clinton. Wall Street didn't put blinders on black people's eyes. That was something that was internal. Wall Street didn't convince black folks back in 2010 when Pew Research folks did a poll. Wall Street didn't convince black people that they were better off in 2010 than they were 10 years before, even though exactly the opposite was true. 1999 and 2000 were the best years on record for black folks in terms of earnings on the white dollar. That is, blacks proportionately made a bigger fraction of the white dollar than ever before. And no other group in the country is suffering from this delirium, according to the Pew poll and other polls that followed up on their observation. Every other ethnic demographic in the country understood that not only was the country in trouble, but their group was in trouble and they were in trouble. Only black folks thought that they were doing better than they ever had before. And black people were in the worst shape of all, had been hardest hit. We at Black Agenda Report call that the Obama effect. But the effect could have had any black president's name on it. It was not distinctly signature Obama. It was an effect that occurred because of the presence of a black person in the White House. And that's because black people historically believe that they are doing well, that there is progress being made based largely on the presence of black faces in high places, blacks who are in prominent positions. That has historically been the signal to us that things are getting better. And in previous eras, it was a good signal. It was rather reliable. Black faces in high places and black progress have been almost synonymous in people's minds, so that we think that we're doing great even if we ain't. Now I know that lots of people, lots of white people, will say that, well, you know, white progressives were also fooled by this Obama person. But number one, white progressives are a small fraction of white people. And so that is not indicative of white folks. I wish it were, but it's not. And in black America, this was a mass phenomenon. And white progressives, at least for the past 50 years, have taken many of their political cues from black folks. So that when black people become passive or much less deluded, then these white folks who take their cues from black people are just at a loss about where to go and what to do. If this age of Obama has taught us anything, it is that the politics of placing black faces in high places can be our undoing, that this has turned into its opposite. Because we have now entered an age, we've been there for some time now, when the corporate rulers have no problem with recruiting and showcasing black political mercenaries to do their bidding. So our old indicators are useless to us, and in fact they can be used against us, and the Obama phenomenon is just the most dramatic example. We at Black Agenda Report have put a great deal of the blame for the black political catastrophe on the black misleadership class. And they deserve to share a great deal of that blame. That class has historically been drawn from the most grasping segment of black America, people who identify their own class interests as being identical to the interests of masses of black people. and in fact a substitute for the interests of black folks. But the fact is, and we can't paper over this either. The fact is that black folks have followed those black misleaders. They have responded to that language and that concept of black faces being in high places signifies progress. Help me get somewhere and I'll bring the rest of the race with me, you know, just trust us. So putting the blame on this small fraction of aspiring and corrupt people that we call the black misleadership class doesn't really answer the problem. What is at root here is the black imperative for unity. This is something that is fundamental to the black polity. It's been our salvation here in the United States. The Black Saga is an amazing story of people who at some points in history made up a little less than 10% of the population, surrounded by almost universal white hostility, and yet developing a political coherence that frankly was envied by most of the rest of the African diaspora because of our political coherence, because of our unity. That's been our saving characteristic. In this tail end of Obama, that is from now on, I think that it's vitally important that we concentrate on the internal struggles within the black nation. And we have not done that consistently because of that imperative to unity. Sometimes it's expressed as not airing dirty linen in public, which is another way of saying don't let the white people see you arguing with each other. But more fundamentally, that comes from the imperative to unity. So we paper over contradictions. And sometimes that didn't do us a great deal of harm because in the previous eras of racial exclusion, the powers that be were so virulently racist that they didn't even utilize their own capacity for co-optation to the full. They just didn't want to associate with black people to the extent that they could conspire with them. But now times are different, and they are quite open to cultivating more Obamas and more Harold Fords and more people like the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Cory Booker. There's an endless supply of these people, and if we're not going to, on smaller scales, repeat the catastrophe, the black political catastrophe that we saw under Obama, we must get rid of that reticence to engage in internal, intra-black political battle. And I think the inspiration here can be found in Malcolm X. Malcolm X means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think that Malcolm X's finest hour was when he did battle with the people he called the Big Six, and that was the NAACP and the SCLC and the Urban League, all of these established and now iconic black institutions. And he talked about them like a dog. He did withering criticism and in public. And when Malcolm did that, he made it acceptable and legitimate in terms of black political discourse for other folks to do so. And we saw in the wake of that a flowering of black political discussion and a flowering of black radicalism in the community because of that example that Malcolm set. So we need to we need to follow Malcolm's example as we get through, as we work our way through this tail end of Obama and beyond, and take off the gloves and fight our enemies, our class enemies, within the black community, and that includes some people who are in this building today. Thank you.
Thank you, Millie, for organizing this. We are in the throes of a great ideological struggle. Much of what Glenn describes and points out about Pew polls and surveys showing black people apparently delusional, I put quotes around that, at least ideologically disoriented, is a manifestation of this great ideological struggle. It is an ideological struggle in the broadest sense of the word. I would suggest that black people are not tuned in to the large questions of this epoch. I would suggest, however, that we have not yet produced an intellectual and political and ideological vanguard that could lead in this moment. So we see this great confusion. But the ideological problem is anchored also in a poverty of the social sciences to go beyond, and this is no slap at journalists, the normal journalistic description of this crisis. In other words, we lack a theory, a worldview that could help us not only understand the moment, but to take appropriate action to unite strategic and decisive social and class forces to alter and change the moment. We don't have that. What we have seen in what many people call a collapse of the black left, and I don't think that is accurate, what we have seen, assisted by the liberals and often conservatives in the black community, is the consolidation ideologically of a respectable black social democracy. Construction of this black social democracy in the era of Obama. Well, it goes back to Du Bois and the problem of the 20th century being the problem of the color line. And I'd like to just indicate very quickly that it is not what most people thought it is. Oh, race is the problem. Yes, race is the problem, but the problem for what? What was Du Bois saying race was the problem for in 1903? It is the problem for bourgeois democracy. This has great significance, both in the appropriation of the concept by the Social Democrats and the actual reality of where we are today as the crisis of race has deepened. First of all, Social Democrats have misappropriated the concept and, for example, have said or argued that the election of Obama, while not ending the crisis of race, was a progressive move in the direction of weakening race as the major problem of the American society and of bourgeois democracy. You know, a great example of this, of course, was Manning Marable's book on Malcolm X. And I prefer to understand the book from the last chapter, where he argues, in effect, and he said this in other places, and this is not ad hominem at all, because he was a friend of mine, but he was wrong, and he's a social democrat. He argued that Malcolm, had he lived, would have been a social democrat and would be supporting Barack Obama's administration. That's the argument of the book. Because Obama represented a progressive move on the part of black people in ending the historic problem of the color line. Now, of course, Manning also argued that the election of Obama represented a renaissance of democracy. No, he argued this. Now back to Du Bois. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of race. If the problem of race does not abate but intensifies as it has in this first decade of the 21st century, it signifies a deepening crisis of bourgeois or liberal democracy. What is the answer to the crisis of bourgeois democracy on the part of the 1/10 of the 1%? Well, we see it around us every day. All we have to do is read the newspapers. An attack upon democracy, a deepening of racial oppression, mass incarceration, mass imprisonment, mass unemployment, mass poverty. We don't even have the social science to adequately analyze the crisis that affects the African American people, but I would prefer that we, for the moment, not talk just generally about the African American people, but about the African American proletariat. Because that's where the crisis is. 10–15% of African Americans are not experiencing the crisis that this mass of unemployed, underemployed, low paid, incarcerated, young black people are experiencing. A society which has targeted them for the greatest hatred of everybody that is not them. So if you're not young, unemployed, uneducated, and poor, and maybe you're black, polls show that often they have the same utter contempt and hatred for the black poor. It is this group, see, this class division, this ideological division, that is what is behind, along with finance capital, the Cory Bookers and the Michael Nutters, and the black agents of this 1%. I'd just like to end on this. This charade of right and left.
That's right.
The Tea Party is the right, Obama and the Democrats are the left. This is a charade. What we have are the right, the far right, and the further right. At the level of the elite. I think this is accurate. But what does this mean? The Obama administration, and this is the hard sell, but it is the necessary thing that we have to say, represents, as a political movement, the consolidation of counter-revolution. What do we mean by counter-revolution? Well, there are many ways to talk about a counter-revolution. Usually we mean a counter-revolution against democracy, against the rights of unions to organize, against the right to have African American studies, against the right of kids to be educated, against the right, if you're black, to be with your friends and go to certain parts of Philadelphia, where I'm from, where the government has the right to accumulate data on every aspect of your life. When Du Bois talked about the problem of the 20th century and race, the crisis of civil liberties inevitably intersects with the crisis of race. You cannot be a civil libertarian without not at the same time being a passionate opponent of anti-black racism. And we must start with the centrality of the African American people. You cannot look at this structure of repression, be it the kill list, the dirty wars, the Verizon and everything we do being surveyed. You cannot look at this and call it anything but either crypto-fascism, open fascism, authoritarian right-wing rule. This is by no means a democracy that we live in. And that illusion has to be burst. I haven't been here except for today, and I'm certain as I look through what's being talked about, so much of what is being talked about here has nothing to do with the actual situation on the ground.
That's right.
And that tells you something about the academic and intellectual left. So many of them use this to bolster their resumes and take it to their department chairs to get tenure and promotion. I spoke here and I spoke there. But they're not talking about the life worlds of the poor, of the oppressed, of the proletariat, and of the black proletariat. I think we've entered the period now where we have to think about ways of forming a new type of black left. Boys, after the failure of the talented 10, I talked about a guiding 100. That's no different than what Lenin and Marx or Gramsci or Ho Chi Minh or anybody else talked about. Few are better, but a better few. But we have to be ideologically and commit ourselves to ideological clarity. This is going to be a long struggle. We cannot expect that there won't be casualties, and there have already been millions of casualties. 2.5 million people in the penitentiary are casualties. In Philadelphia, in 1 week, the police shot more than 7 young men, primarily African men, in the streets of Philadelphia and killed 2 of them in 1 week. So bad that the police commissioner had to call for a federal investigation, probably covering his own ass. But it is that bad. I'm certain it's the same thing in Chicago, the closing of schools, the control of the media, the politics of the big lie, lying about the economy. And as you know, the Wall Street bubble is going to burst in the not too distant future. And they do know that there's going to be another Great Depression. I don't know if we even came out of the one that started in 2007 to 2008. But there'll be another round of this. Europe is already experiencing it. China, India, and the other BRIC countries are experiencing it. So what we have to have, lastly, I say this from the standpoint of the African American struggle for freedom, and I agree with Glenn, the African American people and the African American proletariat will be the decisive fighting force in this next period. We have to consider several things. One, the rebuilding of the left, the rebuilding of the black left, and that is ideologically and organizationally. Secondly, we have to talk about what we talked about a great deal in the past, the building of black united fronts at the grassroots level, be it on the question of mass incarceration, the question of Bradley Manning, the question of war, these dirty wars, the question of unemployment, the questions of the closing of schools. And I'm certain in every city of this country, these broad united fronts are forming that include the unions, the black community, the Latino community, women, unemployed youth, and so on and so forth. That has to go forward. The other thing in the ideological struggle, we have to hammer home to people that the electoral political process is not a vehicle for democracy. It, in fact, is a vehicle for the opposite of democracy. And that will be a large ideological struggle to win, because most people, given the history of the United States and given the history of black people having been denied the right to vote legally for so long, to say that the strategy, by the way, that goes, and I'm ending it, that goes back 40 years, when we said we moved from protest to politics. I don't know if many people remember, I know Nellie might. We moved,
Bayard Rustin.
yeah, Bayard Rustin, but others, from protest to politics, from the street to the legislative councils and the city halls. We now have to reverse that, from politics to protest.
Yeah.
So thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Good morning.
My name is Margaret Kimberly, and I'm an editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, very proudly. And I think this is a perfect time to start talking about the tail end of Obama. January 21st, 2017 is next Inauguration Day. And it should be celebrated as a day of jubilee for black people, a modern day Juneteenth, if you will, because it'll be the last day that Barack Obama will be President of the United States. Before Obama was even elected or heard of, black people spent decades debating whether or not they would ever see such a thing. Could a black person be elected? Would he be assassinated? Would it be a he or a she? Would it be a Republican or a Democrat? So you see, Obama took up mental space in the minds of black people before he was ever even thought of. And that means that his ascension, political ascension, was a bad thing. The years of his administration have been the low point of politics for black people. Black politics had been on life support for some time before 2008, but his election marked the day that the plug was finally pulled. Black politics were killed by many things, by COINTELPRO, by mass incarceration, by the power of money in politics. The Congressional Black Caucus went from being the conscience of the Congress to being like everybody else. So the supreme irony that the election of a black man meant the end of black politics can't be overstated. And the happiness of black people in seeing him can't be overstated either. There were huge increases in levels of voting participation for the goal of getting him into office. I mean, there is no measurement, I think, of the happiness. I guess if you had a happiness meter, you could find out. So I think it's not an overstatement to say that many black people are actually addicted to Obama and to this sight they have seen that they never thought would happen. And we all know from personal relationships and anecdotes that there's nothing good about being in a relationship where one person has the advantage and the other has the disadvantage. You think of a battered wife or even battered husband. And the relationship with Obama is along those lines. A lot of people are addicted to him and will need to go into a period of a recovery, if you will, once he leaves office. But that doesn't tell us much. It could be the happy ending of a reality show where the recovered addict comes home clean, or the sad story about the person who didn't even finish the program because they were afraid of change. And I'm being partly humorous, but it's the best model I can think of to describe this phenomenon. The damage done to the cognitive abilities of black people is immense and can't be undone by any typical means. This love defies logic for most of us sitting here, and his absence will be difficult to take. It's interesting about the Obama files. There are two minds about him. Shows the weirdness of the relationship. When he has a political success, they sing his praises and speak endlessly of how smart he is and how high he will rank in the presidential pantheon. And on the other hand, when he does something indefensible, the genius suddenly becomes weak and hapless and unable to do what he really wanted to do because of those mean old Republicans. And by the way, success to these people just means Obama getting his way. It doesn't matter if what it is he's doing ends up hurting them or not. Republican unhappiness is reason enough to be happy. We're talking about the tail end of Obama, but there's something important to keep in mind. He has almost 4 years left. 3 years, 7 months, and 12 days. So that's a fair amount of time for him to do damage. In 4 years, he turned the political world on its head. Obamacare, for example, may be anathema to Republicans now, but it wasn't always so. It's essentially the same program that Nixon proposed 40 years ago. So it's now official. The Democrats of today are the Republicans of a few decades back. Obama has been praised by an odd group of people for a Democrat to be praised. People like William Crystal called him a born-again neocon, since the story of the NSA spy, which by the way is not news. If we had a better media, this would have been a news story several years ago. There's nothing new going on with that. But his absence will cause withdrawal symptoms from people who previously would never have had common cause with anybody like Bill Kristol. Before he became president, Social Security was the third rail of politics. Do you remember that expression? Untouchable to anybody who wanted to survive in elected office. It was the lowest hanging fruit for Democrats. But now the Republican dream of eviscerating the safety net has come true and during a Democratic administration. It can be touched at any time. While Democrats spend their time obsessing over the latest racist and or asinine statement made by some Republican congressman whose name they didn't even know about until now. But that shouldn't be true of anybody who attends an event that's called the Left Forum. We should have been we at BAR, and I'm assuming most of you have been speaking out about this man all along. Our goal should be to recreate black politics and all politics from a left perspective, which is not, I add, not the same thing as having black politicians in office. The joy of seeing a black commander-in-chief and first lady presiding over state dinners has come at a very high price for 30 million people. Senate candidate